So welcome to everybody for this 2024 Spring Meetings Governor Talk Series. My name is Alfred Kammer. I'm the Director of the European Department in the IMF. And I'm very happy and very pleased to welcome Minister Mehmet Şimşek to today's Governor Talk. Minister Şimşek has a brilliant history as a public servant. Before his current job as Minister of Treasury and Finance, he served as Deputy Prime Minister for Economic and Financial Affairs from 2015 to 2018, as Minister of Finance from 2009 to 2015, and Minister of Economy from 2007 and 2009. And of course, he was a strong and is a strong advocate of prudent macroeconomic policies and is clearly has identified structural reforms are key for resilience and growth. And of course, you also had a brilliant career in the private sector, so you have seen both sides of the economy. We will discuss today and get some insights from the Minister on the pivot which took place in economic policies in mid-2023 that reduced the vulnerabilities of the Turkish economy, and also how this economic landscape in Turkey is changing. So with that, I'm going over to my first question to the Minister. For everybody here in the room, we have a few questions from me to the Minister, and then we are moving to you to answer. The Minister is happy to answer your questions you might have on Turkey and Turkey's economic developments. So my first question, Minister, is when you're looking at the Turkish economy in the global context, but also where you have moved to in terms of your economic reform program, what do you feel are the current challenges which you are facing today?
Well, thank you for this opportunity. The biggest challenge domestically, of course, is high inflation. So that's why attaining price stability, bringing inflation back to single digit, is our top priority. That's the single most important challenge and the single most, important priority. Secondly, of course, last year, Turkey has experienced a devastating earthquake, and that created a big hole in the budget. So restoring fiscal health, making sure that fiscal discipline is institutionalized, is yet another important goal and challenge. But also disinflation requires support from fiscal side. Thirdly, all countries have structural problems, and Turkey is not an exception. And therefore, we have a comprehensive structural reform program to address those structural problems, such as enhancing competitiveness, boosting productivity, improving investment climate, achieving green transition, digital transformation. All of these are some of the major issues, including, of course, at the time of AI, reskilling, upskilling people, so improving human capital stock. So this is the agenda. These are some of the key challenges. Globally, of course, we live in a neighborhood that is relatively rough. We do get affected by geopolitical tensions and wars. Trade fragmentation is an issue for everyone, but we do benefit from friendshoring and nearshoring. I think Turkey is one of the best candidates in terms of friendshoring, nearshoring, which is the new kind of like norm post-pandemic, and of course with all these geopolitical tensions, the geostrategic competition. We have relatively favorable demographics. Globally, of course, aging population is an issue. It's a more longer-term issue. So we still have a decent 10 to 15 years of demographic window. One other thing is global indebtedness is a big issue. Turkey is, in that sense, better positioned. Turkey's overall indebtedness, including household debt, private sector debt, government debt, is 110% compared to 255% for emerging market universe. So as you can see, in terms of some long-term challenges, demographics, indebtedness, and trade protectionism, we seem to be better positioned, relatively speaking. No one is immune. But domestically, as I said, price stability is #1 challenge.
So domestic challenges still need to be addressed, but on the geopolitical front, on the external side, many of the challenges are actually the same in Europe, and you're facing them, and you think you are actually slightly better positioned than some of the other European countries when it comes to looking forward to these challenges. Tell us how you have come here after the pivot in mid-2023 with economic policies. What reforms have been working very well? What have not worked very well? Can you give us a bit of a sense? Because you have made much progress on some of the objectives you have pointed out already.
Thank you. Well, last year, Turkey had parliamentary and presidential elections. President Erdogan got a mandate for 5 years, and the ruling party has a comfortable majority along with its junior partner at the parliament. Clearly, there was need for course correction on economic policy front. And so we started off building a new team, and then, of course, putting together a new program. The program is a 3-year program. It's a pretty comprehensive. It has 3 main pillars. One element of it, one key pillar, is monetary policy normalization, which required major course correction. That is central bank's mandate. There's a great team there. Simplification is also part of that. A lot of macroprudential measures were put in place as a substitute to monetary policy. Clearly, that some of those measures were barriers to properly functioning market. So simplification has been underway. Monetary policy normalization has been underway. So that's one major pillar of the program. The second component, of course, is restoring fiscal health. Historically, Turkey, in particular, if you look at past 20 years, we've done well when it comes to fiscal discipline. The average fiscal deficit to GDP for the past 20 years was roughly about 2.4%. By global emerging market standards, pretty good.
Pretty good.
And debt to GDP ratio, as of last year, is 29.5%. That's gross European Union definition, general government. So it's pretty impressive balance sheet. So what has happened last year, of course, earthquake created a big hole, as I said earlier. That's one-off. We can live with that, considering we have low level of debt to GDP. But clearly, we need to tighten the fiscal stance to provide more support to central bank to bring inflation down at a time when inflation was de-anchored, where pricing behaviors were pretty out of, let's say, unruly. So restoring fiscal health is nothing to do with debt sustainability. It's more to do with creating buffers and fiscal space for potential next shocks, but equally important to support central bank in its disinflation efforts, but also creating fiscal space for reforms. The third pillar, as I mentioned earlier, is structural reform, structural transformation. Now, one aspect that probably is new compared to past talk of reforms is that it's fashionable nowadays to talk about a new industrial policy. And, I'm aware of what it means when you talk about industrial policy, but in our case, it's going to be pretty transparent, pretty rule-based, unlike 1970s or so import substitution models. So we want to channel resources to more productive areas, to reduce our carbon footprint, to make the economy more competitive, but also to see how we can enhance growth potential through higher productivity. So that's really where some industrial policy comes in. I mean, if you look at relative to PPP GDP, our manufacturing value added as a percent of GDP is pretty high. But when it comes to economic complexity, meaning where we stand in the value chain, we're not where we would like to be. And that's where the reform comes in. That's where the industrial policy comes in.
So important progress on the disinflation effort, fiscal consolidation.
One thing I forgot,
yeah.
Sorry for interrupting you. Last year, we did a front-loaded fiscal adjustment. So monetary policy course correction, but we also did quite a significant front-loaded fiscal adjustment. What do I mean by that? Well, to help cover earthquake-related spending, we needed to raise taxes, and there were some limited spending control. This year, there's going to be more of the latter.
So disinflation, progress, fiscal consolidation, supporting the monetary policy effort, but doing a bit more and more to come, and importance of structural reforms in order to increase productivity, because in the end, that's key for generating that growth you envisage for the future. Has that already changed the investment outlook for the country?
Yeah, I mean, I think when you put together sound policies and a good narrative in the form of structural reform, so a combination of sound policies and structural reforms tends to help you regain investor confidence. Last year, initially, there were a lot of question marks about longevity of this effort, the program. But I think I can tell you, based on my interaction with investors over the last few days, those questions have disappeared. Now the questions are more about macro issues. So this is welcome, by the way. So I think we've regained international investor confidence. That is reflected in a significant decline in CDS. Countries' 5-year CDS were as high as 700 basis points. It's down to around 300 basis points. In fact, relative to emerging markets, our spreads have narrowed. So we have begun to outperform, MB plus Türkiye index, MB plus compared to pre-August, pre-September last year. So our spreads have narrowed. External debt rollover ratios have improved. Rollover ratios for banks for the past 10 months have gone as high as 149% compared to 96% pre-program. And for real corporate sector, it's gone up to almost 120% compared to 73% pre-program. And of course, we've also have had a few rating actions. 2 rating agencies have upgraded the outlook to positive, but 1 rating agency moved from negative outlook to 1 full upgrade plus positive outlook, which is quite something, which suggests that we're doing all the right things. We're on the right track. But we need time to show results, to convince broader society. In Turkey, I mean, understandably, households look at year-on-year inflation. Now, year-on-year inflation reflects past 12 months. Markets tends to focus on what will happen next 12 months. So if you look at the headline inflation, it has been trending up at a time when we talk about disinflation. This is the challenge. But clearly, 12 months forward, inflation expectations have moved towards mid-30s. Now, this is obviously a high number, but compared to where we are, close to 70%, this is quite a progress. So our program foresees inflation falling to a midpoint of 36% this year, and then 14% following year, and then single digit in 2026. We think these targets, while ambitious, they are achievable because we have a tight monetary policy that is supportive. Beyond earthquake spending, there is also a tight fiscal policy by long-term standards, and incomes policies clearly needs to be more supportive. So there is progress. We just need time to show the results. One other thing that really happened, growth rebalancing is well underway. If you go back to second quarter of last year, and if you look at the headline growth, net domestic demand contribution was over 10 percentage points, while net exports were a drag in tune of 6.3 percentage points. If you look at the implementation of 2 quarters, meaning the last quarter of 2023, net exports moved from minus 6.3% to minus 0.6 percentage points, while domestic demand contribution fell from over 10 percentage points to 4.6 percentage points. So rebalancing is happening. Output gap is declining, and it will disappear soon. And current account deficit fell, annualized, of course, from $60 billion in May last year, pre-program, to just over $30 billion in February this year. So current account deficit is narrowing. Fiscal deficit will narrow. Fiscal impulse will disappear. And monetary policy is now fully functional. And I think this is obviously not my call, is for markets to make that call and central bank to make that assessment. But the assessment is that it is sufficiently tight enough to anchor inflation expectations.
So a key was a comprehensive reform program. Key was steadfast implementation in order to get that credibility. You're saying this has already worked in terms of changing the investor and investment outlook. More work to do in terms of convincing the population and dealing with inflation inertia and backward-looking expectations. What kind of other key risks do you see for your macroeconomic outlook?
Well, the inertia component, services inflation tends to be stickier. Everywhere. Core goods inflation tends to respond faster to monetary. Some of the challenges when it comes to inflation, I think one challenge is monetary policy transmission mechanism in typically emerging markets, but in particular in Turkey, is not as effective as we would like to see. And that's why we also, in our toolkit, we went for selective credit tightening and also quantitative tightening. So that's why sometimes this is misunderstood. They say, why don't you just go for conventional tightening? Why go around things? We're not. Conventional tightening has limits because there's currency substitution. So things like that. So that's one challenge, is to enhance the monetary policy transmission mechanism. We're working on it. Huge, significant progress. Inertia in services, I think will ultimately, we will be able to break it up, but we need time. Housing prices usually tends to be a leading indicator for that, like for rents, and housing prices have rolled over. And so probably rents will follow. So incomes policies play a bigger role here, and probably going forward, the policy backdrop, the policy mix is going to be significantly more supportive. On the fiscal side, last year, much of the adjustment was associated with tax hikes, revenue side. This year, we have started a spending review, and so we're looking at spending control, and where is possible, spending cuts, but also prioritization of productive areas as to where we spend money. So yes, governments do spend money, but should we be building railways that connect major manufacturing centers with ports? Absolutely. Why? Because that would reduce our carbon footprint through electrification, but also it would make us more competitive. Similarly, if you bring water and obviously land together, you can have industrial crops. So if you spend on irrigation, on agriculture infrastructure, clearly that is conducive of higher productivity, better competitiveness, and hopefully, supply side-wise, better disinflationary outlook. So we really, when it comes to spending, non-discretionary room in the budget is limited, typically, for most emerging markets, okay? So I'm being very realistic here. But people expect us to control spending, and we will deliver. We will control spending, and to the extent that is possible, we will cut spending.
You mentioned at the beginning, Turkey lives in a rough neighborhood, but Turkey is also very resilient. Any particular geopolitical, geoeconomic risks which you are especially worried about or sensitive to?
Well, the rule-based system is under pressure, let's put it this way. Today's circumstances reminds me Antonio Gramsci's quote from 1930s. He says, the old world is dying. The new world is struggling to be born. Now it is a time of monsters. So really, when we look at the neighborhood and what's happening, is worrisome. I think the respect for rule-based system, the respect for international humanitarian law is clearly weak. And that's an issue as a human being, not as a policymaker only. Secondly, when you have obviously geopolitical tensions, regardless of whether you are involved or not directly, there are spillovers, either in the form of high energy prices. In 2022, our energy import bill was as high as $97 billion because of the conflict in the north. So clearly, regardless of whether there is a direct impact, the risk premia associated with the whole neighborhood tends to be higher, simply because conflicts create uncertainties. So unfortunately, it is what it is. We would like to be a constructive player. Our region needs peace and prosperity. Clearly, that is in short supply right now. But I'm optimistic that we learn and we move on, and hopefully, even in today's bigger picture, I think at G20 level we all argue that this trade fragmentation is not in anyone's interest. Protectionism is not. Yes, trade does cause dislocations, but that's a fiscal and policy issue to address. We know that in the past, trade was the engine of growth. And that engine has been sputtering. And that's why we are stuck in low growth environment. It's not obviously just productivity. Productivity obviously is key, but it's really this slowdown in trade growth has been one of the major, So yes, I think the world needs to go back to a new order. I don't know what sort of order, but hopefully a rule-based order and a better one, a more inclusive world order, a more just world order.
No, thank you for reminding us about what the trade system, the multilateral rules-based trade system has been delivering in terms of global prosperity, and that this is something which is essential to maintain. And short-sightedness in terms of trade protectionism is a poison for all. We have some time for a few questions. If you have a question, could you please stand up and identify yourself? Yeah, we have somebody here in the second row.
Hey, how's it going? Can you hear me? Good? Oh, good. Good now. How's it going? Thank you for being here and thank you for the presentation. My name is Pedro and I'm from Mexico. And I just wanted to ask if you ever take advantage of the situations, as you mentioned, the geopolitical tensions. I would say an example for us that when the United States and China had their political tensions, their geopolitical tensions, we started to take advantage of the situation and we became the number one partner of the United States. So I'm wondering if you ever take these type of situations going on around your neighborhood, as you mentioned, and take advantage and say, maybe we can, profit out of this or something. Thank you.
Thank you. Does it work? Yeah, okay. I think, look, if you look at recent data, friendshoring, meaning trade with geopolitically close countries, is going up, and trade with geopolitically further, away countries, meaning it's going down. We're lucky in that sense because we're friends with Europe because we have a full customs union with them. Plus, we have this association agreement dating back to 1960s. Despite some disagreements, when it comes to trade, we are friends with the European Union. And European Union is a big, obviously, trading bloc. Second, with Middle East and North Africa, again, we have strong historic and cultural ties, and that also qualifies as us as near and friend. The same applies to Central Asia. So I would argue that we are naturally one of the best candidates to benefit from friendshoring, nearshoring. But that requires us also to boost productivity and competitiveness. So that's really the key. So there's no substitute to sound policies in doing the right things. So that's really where we need to do our homework, but we are there. So in that sense, we feel that we're somewhat, relatively in a better position compared to other countries.
Thank you. We have time for one more question. Back there, please.
Miret Magji from Bloomberg. I want to ask the minister if the monetary tightening cycle ended or not yet.
It wouldn't be appropriate for a finance minister to comment on monetary policy stance. As an economist, of course, I have my own views, but that wouldn't be appropriate. I think you should host the governor here.
So you're respecting central bank independence?
Absolutely.
Any more questions? Yes, one more, please.
My name is Abe. I'm an undergrad student at Beloit College. And my question is, how is Turkey dealing with, you mentioned you are in a rough neighborhood and you have a lot of people who are displaced at your borders, and climate change is growing, and how is Turkey dealing with the effects of climate refugees and other displaced people?
Thank you. Look, many of you probably don't know that Turkey is the largest refugee hosting country. You probably, and that's why if you look at international assistance in that format, as a percent of GDP, again, Turkey ranks in the top 3. So, you know, the spillover, the impact is quite significant. Climate change is really a major issue. I think, you know, we're running out of time to prevent an impending climate crisis. And it's going to be pretty costly unless we really act swiftly. There's the financing aspect, which is big. And that's why, you know, one of the core theme at G20 is sustainable financing and all these kind of issues. So as far as Turkey is concerned, green transition is not a choice. It's a necessity for a number of reasons. Of course, it's good to talk about green transition because, you know, achieving net zero at some point. For Turkey, we have 2053. But we are heavily dependent on energy imports. I'm talking about fossil fuels here. As I said earlier, the bill in 2022 was $97 billion. Last year, it was over $70 billion. This year is projected to be $77 billion. These are big numbers. And for a country that have a sizable current account deficit, imagine if we had, you know, better, let's say, renewables, you know, primary, I mean, dependency on energy imports, if it was less, we could have a current account surplus. So clearly that's another reason. The third one is our European friends are contemplating of introducing carbon tax for imports. They are going to start off with a few sectors, but ultimately will probably be expanded. So we need to be prepared for that. And that's why I think reducing carbon footprint, you know, achieving, putting in place more renewable energy is key. As of today, if you look at Turkey's power capacity, you know, the installed capacity, 55% is renewable, which is not bad. And we aim to invest $99 billion over the next decade to push these up to about 2/3. We also have a nuclear power plant that is under construction, will come on board. So hopefully, within a decade or so, Turkey hopefully will have more than 2/3 of its energy generated from what would be considered renewable and not fossil fuel.
Thank you very much, Minister, for your insight. And please, a round of applause for the Minister.
Thank you.